Billionaire attended the Christmas party, smiling, until his ex-wife arrived holding their baby. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The medication bottle rattled in Willow Lancaster's trembling hands as she counted the small white pills. 2 left. Her anxiety medication was running low again, and the prescription refill appointment wasn't until next week. She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion pressing against her chest. From the nursery came a soft whimper that made her heart skip. Liam was stirring from his afternoon nap, if 30 minutes could even be called a nap. At 2.5 months old, her son still fought sleep like it was his enemy, his tiny lungs working harder than they should, his premature body still catching up to where it needed to be. Willow set the bottle down and moved quickly but quietly to his crib. Liam's eyes were open, those impossibly blue eyes that reminded her of someone she'd been trying to forget for 7 months. His little fist waved in the air, and despite everything, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, the crushing loneliness, she smiled. "Hey, my sweet boy," she whispered, lifting him carefully. He felt heavier than last week, which was always a good sign. Dr. Martinez had been pleased with his weight gain at their last appointment, though the bills from those weekly checkups were piling up faster than Willow could manage. Her phone buzzed on the changing table. A text from her landlord about late rent, another from her client canceling tomorrow's photo session, and then unexpectedly, a call from Blake Westbrook. Willow stared at the screen, her brother-in-law's name making her stomach clench. She hadn't spoken to any of the Westbrook family since she'd left that house 7 months ago, pregnant and heartbroken. Alexander's family didn't even know about the separation. As far as they knew, she and Alex were just busy with work and travel. "Hello?" she answered, balancing Liam against her shoulder. "Willow, God, it's so good to hear your voice." Blake's warmth came through the phone like a hug she desperately needed. "Listen, I know it's last minute, but you have to come to Christmas dinner tonight. Mom's been asking about you for weeks, and Dad got that fancy wine you liked from Italy. The whole family will be there." Willow's throat tightened. "Blake, and we want to meet the baby. Alex mentioned you had the baby, but he's been so weird and secretive about everything. Come on, Will. It's Christmas. Family should be together." The irony cut deep. Family should be together. She looked down at Liam, whose father had chosen boardroom meetings over biology appointments, international flights over intimate moments. Alexander had known she was pregnant when he walked out. He just hadn't cared enough to stay. "I don't know if that's a good idea," Willow said carefully. "Please, just for a few hours. Mom made that cranberry sauce you love, and honestly, I think everyone's getting tired of Alex's mood lately. You always made him happier." Happier? Willow almost laughed. She'd made Alexander Westbrook, billionaire tech mogul, happier while she slowly fell apart, trying to be the perfect wife to a man who lived in airports and conference rooms. But Liam deserved to know his family. Even if his father had chosen to be absent, his grandparents, aunts, and uncles shouldn't have to pay for Alexander's cowardice. "Okay," she heard herself saying. "I'll come." "Really? That's amazing. Dinner's at 7, but come earlier if you want. Oh, and Will, I'm really glad you're coming. I've missed you." After hanging up, Willow sat in her small apartment's living room, holding Liam close. The space felt even smaller now, the walls seeming to close in as reality hit her. She was going to see Alexander tonight, the man who'd promised to love her through everything, then disappeared the moment everything got complicated. She looked down at Liam, who was studying her face with those serious blue eyes. "Your daddy doesn't know how beautiful you are," she whispered. "He doesn't know about your first smile, or how you grabbed my finger so tight when you were in the NICU. He doesn't know that you're the strongest little fighter I've ever met." Her voice cracked on the last words. The memories of those 15 days in the neonatal intensive care unit still haunted her nights. Watching Liam struggle to breathe through machines, praying to every god she could think of, calling Alexander's phone over and over while it went straight to voicemail. He'd been in Tokyo, closing some deal worth millions, while their son fought for his life. Willow stood up, decision made. She would go tonight, but not for Alexander. Not even for his family, really. She would go for Liam so he could be recognized and loved by the people who should have been there from the beginning. She began getting them both ready, choosing a simple black dress that hid how thin she'd gotten from stress and sleepless nights. For Liam, she picked the blue outfit that brought out his eyes and packed an extra blanket, extra bottles, and the small pharmacy of medications and supplies that accompanied them everywhere. As she strapped Liam into his car seat, Willow caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked older than 28, her light brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dark circles under green eyes that used to sparkle with dreams of the future. 7 months ago, she'd been planning a nursery with the man she thought would be her forever. Tonight, she was introducing their son to a father who was essentially a stranger. The drive to the Westbrook mansion took 45 minutes through Christmas Eve traffic. Willow used the time to practice what she might say if Alexander was there, which he probably would be. The family always gathered for holidays, and despite his busy schedule, Alex rarely missed Christmas. Would he be surprised to see her? Would he even care about Liam, or would this just be another inconvenience in his perfectly ordered life? As she pulled through the familiar iron gates of the estate, Willow's hands started shaking again. The mansion glowed with warm light, its windows revealing glimpses of the family she'd once thought would be hers forever. Christmas trees sparkled in every room, and she could see figures moving around, probably finishing dinner preparations. This was it. After 7 months of silence, of raising their son alone, of building a life from the fragments Alexander had left behind, she was about to face the man who'd walked away from everything they'd created together. The question that had kept her awake so many nights suddenly felt more urgent than ever. When love breaks, can it ever truly be repaired? Or do some cracks run too deep to heal? The Westbrook mansion's front door opened before Willow could even ring the bell. Margaret Westbrook, Alexander's mother, stood in the doorway wearing an elegant burgundy dress and the kind of smile that had always made Willow feel welcomed into their world. "Willow, darling." Margaret's voice carried genuine warmth as she stepped forward, then stopped abruptly when her eyes fell on the baby carrier in Willow's hands. "Oh my goodness, this is Liam," Willow said softly, her heart hammering as she lifted the carrier slightly. Liam was awake but quiet, his blue eyes taking in the golden light spilling from the mansion's crystal chandeliers. Margaret's hand flew to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. "He's absolutely beautiful. Those eyes, oh Willow, those are definitely Westbrook eyes." She gestured them inside quickly. Come in. It's freezing out there, and babies get cold so easily." The familiar scent of cinnamon and pine hit Willow as she stepped into the marble foyer. Everything looked exactly the same. The sweeping staircase with its garland-wrapped banister, the enormous Christmas tree that nearly touched the cathedral ceiling, the family photos lining the hallway. Except now, seeing it all again felt like visiting a museum of her former life. "Richard," Margaret called toward the living room. "Come quickly. Willow's here with the baby." Footsteps approached and Alexander's father appeared, his silver hair perfectly styled and his face lighting up when he saw them. Richard Westbrook had always been kind to Willow, treating her more like a daughter than a daughter-in-law. Well, he said, his voice warm with affection. "There's our girl." His eyes shifted to the baby carrier and softened immediately. "And this must be our grandson." Willow nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by their genuine joy. She'd expected questions, maybe even judgment about why they hadn't seen the baby before now. Instead, she found the same unconditional love the Westbrook family had always shown her. "Can we—" Margaret hesitated, her hands fluttering nervously. "Can I hold him?" "Of course." Willow carefully lifted Liam from his carrier, supporting his head the way she'd learned to do in the NICU. "He's still a bit delicate because he was premature, but he's getting stronger every day." Margaret accepted Liam with the practiced ease of someone who'd raised 4 children. The moment he was in her arms, her face transformed with pure grandmotherly bliss. "Oh, he's perfect. Look at these little fingers and that button nose. Richard, look at his hair. It's got that little cowlick just like Alex had as a baby." The mention of Alexander's name sent a chill through Willow's chest, but she forced herself to smile. "He weighs almost 10 pounds now. The doctors are really pleased with his progress." "Premature?" Richard's brow furrowed with concern. "How premature?" 7 months, Willow said quietly. "He spent 15 days in the NICU, but he's a fighter." Margaret looked up sharply. 15 days? "Willow, honey, why didn't you call us? We would have been there in a heartbeat." The question Willow had been dreading hung in the air. She couldn't explain that their son hadn't told them about the separation, that she'd been completely alone during the most terrifying time of her life. "It all happened so fast," she said instead. "And Alex was traveling so much for work." "That boy works too hard," Richard muttered, but his attention was immediately captured by Liam making a small sound. "He's waking up. Hello there, little man. I'm your grandpa." "Uncle Blake," a voice called from the kitchen. "Is Willow here yet?" Blake appeared in the doorway, grinning widely until he saw the baby in his mother's arms. His expression shifted to one of wonder. "Whoa, he's real. I mean, I knew he was real, but seeing him," he approached carefully as if Liam might break. "He really does have Alex's eyes. That's kind of amazing. Where is your brother, anyway?" Margaret asked, still gazing adoringly at Liam. "He should be here by now." Willow's stomach clenched. She'd been hoping against hope that maybe Alexander wouldn't show up, that she could introduce Liam to his family and leave before facing the man who'd abandoned them both. "He texted that he was running late," Blake said. "Some last-minute call with the London office. You know Alex." "Yes," Willow thought bitterly. "I know Alex. Work always comes first." "Well, he's missing precious moments with his son," Margaret said firmly. "Willow, tell me everything. When was he born? What was labor like? I want to hear every detail." For the next hour, Willow found herself surrounded by warmth and attention as the family passed Liam around like the precious gift he was. Alexander's sister Emma arrived with her husband and 2 young children, who were immediately fascinated by their new baby cousin. His youngest brother David showed up with his girlfriend, both cooing over Liam's tiny hands and feet. The normalcy of it all, the Christmas music playing softly, the children laughing, the adults sharing stories, made Willow's chest ache with longing. This was what she'd imagined their life would be like. Family gatherings where she belonged, where Liam would grow up surrounded by love and tradition. Instead, she felt like she was visiting someone else's life. "You must be exhausted, dear," Margaret said during a quiet moment when Liam was sleeping peacefully in Emma's arms. "I remember those early days with premature babies. Everything is so much more intense when they're fragile." Willow nodded, not trusting her voice. The exhaustion went so much deeper than just sleep deprivation. It was the bone-deep weariness of carrying everything alone, of making every decision by herself, of being the only one standing guard over their son's well-being. "I hope Alex has been helpful," Emma added, adjusting Liam's blanket. "I know he can be clueless about baby stuff, but I'm sure he's trying." The statement hung in the air like a challenge Willow couldn't answer honestly. How could she explain that Alexander hadn't seen his son take his first breath, hadn't held him during those terrifying nights in the hospital, hadn't witnessed any of the small miracles that marked Liam's journey into the world? "He's been busy," Willow said carefully, the understatement of the century. Just then, the front door opened with the decisive sound that always announced Alexander's arrival. Confident footsteps echoed in the marble foyer, followed by his voice calling out cheerfully, "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was insane," and that call ran longer than expected. The family room fell silent. Willow's heart stopped completely as those familiar footsteps approached. 7 months of separation, 7 months of silence, 7 months of raising their child alone, and now he was here, probably expecting to slide back into family Christmas as if nothing had changed. He appeared in the doorway still wearing his business suit, his dark hair slightly messed from the December wind, that confident smile already spreading across his face as he prepared to charm his way through being late. Then his eyes found Willow sitting on the couch, and the smile froze. Then his gaze shifted to Emma, who was holding a tiny baby in a blue outfit, and the color drained from his face completely. Time seemed suspended in crystalline silence. Alexander Westbrook stood frozen in the doorway, his briefcase still clutched in one hand, his eyes locked on the tiny bundle in his sister's arms. The confident mask he wore so effortlessly in boardrooms and business meetings cracked completely, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. "Alex?" Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Honey, come meet your son." Son. The word hit Alexander like a physical blow. He'd known intellectually that Willow had given birth. He'd received the brief text message months ago, just 2 words, "baby born." But seeing Liam in person, breathing and real and unmistakably carrying Westbrook features, made everything devastatingly concrete. Willow watched Alexander's face cycle through emotions she'd never seen before. Shock, recognition, something that might have been grief, and underneath it all, a fear so profound it made her own chest tighten despite her anger. Alexander's voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." The understatement was so inadequate that Emma actually snorted. "Alex, what do you mean you didn't know? This is your wife and your baby." Of course they'd be here for Christmas. Wife. Willow flinched at the word. Technically true. They'd never filed divorce papers, had never made their separation official, but the title felt like wearing clothes that no longer fit. Alexander's eyes found Willow's across the room, and she saw him realize that his family didn't know. They didn't know about the fights that had escalated until they could barely be in the same room. They didn't know about the night he'd told her that maybe they'd rushed into marriage, that maybe he wasn't ready for the responsibility of a family. They didn't know that he'd walked out the door and hadn't come back. "Can I?" Alexander set his briefcase down with shaking hands. "Can I hold him?" Emma looked between Alexander and Willow, finally sensing the undercurrent of tension that had been building since he walked in. "Of course you can hold your own son. Here." She stood up carefully, supporting Liam's head as she'd seen Willow do, and moved toward Alexander. But instead of handing the baby over immediately, she paused, studying her brother's face. "Alex, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong with you?" "Nothing's wrong," he said quickly, but his hands were visibly trembling as he reached for Liam. It's been a long day." The moment Liam settled into Alexander's arms, everything changed. The baby, who had been contentedly quiet, began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching up as if he could sense the tension radiating from this stranger holding him. "Shh," Alexander whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "It's okay. I'm your dad." The words seemed to surprise him as much as they did everyone else. Willow watched this powerful man, who commanded rooms full of executives, who made decisions worth millions without blinking, hold their 10-pound son like he might break him. "He doesn't know you," Willow said quietly, and the simple statement carried the weight of 7 months of abandonment. Alexander's eyes snapped up to meet hers, and she saw him understand exactly what she meant. Liam didn't know his father's voice, his scent, his touch. To their son, Alexander was a complete stranger. "Doesn't know him," Richard laughed, oblivious to the tension. "Of course he knows his daddy. Babies always know family." But Liam's fussing was escalating into genuine distress, his small body tensing as Alexander tried awkwardly to soothe him. Willow's maternal instincts kicked in automatically. She could see that Liam was getting overwhelmed by the unfamiliar handling, the nervous energy Alexander was projecting. "He needs to be held differently," she said, standing up. "His stomach is still sensitive, and when he gets overstimulated—" "I can figure it out," Alexander said sharply, then immediately looked stricken by his own tone. I just need a minute to—" Liam's crying intensified, and Margaret clucked sympathetically. "Oh, sweetheart, he's just overwhelmed. Christmas can be a lot for little ones. Maybe he needs to eat." Willow moved closer, her hands instinctively reaching for her son. "He's probably hungry. He eats every 2 hours because he was premature." "Premature?" Alexander's head snapped up. "What do you mean, premature? How premature?" The question revealed just how little he knew about his own son's dramatic entrance into the world. Willow felt the familiar surge of anger and hurt that had carried her through those terrible first weeks. 7 months, she said, taking Liam from Alexander's arms. The moment she held him, the baby began to settle, recognizing the familiar comfort of his mother's touch. He was born at 32 weeks after I had complications. Complications? Alexander's face went white. What kind of complications was it? Were you? I hemorrhaged at 3 in the morning, Willow said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. I called 911 alone. I went to the hospital alone. I watched our son fight for his life alone. The room had gone completely silent. Even the Christmas music seemed to fade into background noise as the weight of Willow's words sank in. Willow, Margaret breathed. Honey, why didn't you call us? We would have dropped everything. I tried calling the only person I thought should be there, Willow said, her eyes never leaving Alexander's stricken face. But he was in Tokyo, closing a deal worth more than our son's first breath. Alexander looked like she'd slapped him. You don't understand. That deal was for us, for our future. Our future? Willow's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. What future, Alex? The one where you disappear for weeks at a time? The one where you come home just long enough to make me feel like I'm asking for too much by wanting my husband to actually be present in our marriage? That's not fair, Alexander said, but his voice lacked conviction. Fair? Willow laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? Our son spent 15 days in the NICU, 15 days hooked up to machines fighting to breathe, and I sat by his bedside every single day wondering if he was going to survive. You know what's not fair? Having to explain to doctors why the father wasn't there to sign consent forms. Emma gasped softly. Alex, you weren't there when he was born? Alexander opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he possibly say? That he'd been too scared to come home? That he'd convinced himself that keeping busy with work would somehow make the responsibility of fatherhood less terrifying? Liam, sensing his mother's distress, began crying again. Willow immediately shifted into caretaker mode, swaying gently and making soft shushing sounds that calmed him almost instantly. "I think we should talk," Alexander said quietly. "Now you want to talk?" Willow's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more pain than any scream could have. 7 months too late for talking, Alex. The family watched this exchange with growing horror, finally understanding that this wasn't just a case of busy schedules or miscommunication. Their golden boy, their successful son and brother, had abandoned his wife and child. Alexander took a step toward them, and Willow instinctively took a step back, holding Liam protectively against her chest. The movement was subtle, but it spoke volumes about how much trust had been broken. The silence in the Westbrook family room was suffocating. Margaret sat down heavily on the nearest chair, her hand pressed to her heart as if trying to keep it from breaking. Richard's face had darkened with disappointment and anger, an expression rarely seen from the typically gentle patriarch. "Alexander James Westbrook." Margaret's voice carried the kind of authority that could still make her grown son feel like a scolded child. "How could you not tell us? How could you let that poor girl go through all of this alone?" "It's complicated," Alexander said weakly, running his hands through his hair. "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it," Emma interrupted, her voice sharp with protective fury. "Explain how you weren't there when your son was born. Explain how Willow had to handle a medical emergency by herself while you were off playing businessmen." Willow bounced Liam gently, trying to calm both him and herself. The baby had picked up on the tension in the room and was becoming increasingly fussy. "I should go," she said quietly. "This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come." "No," David spoke up for the first time, his young voice firm. "Don't leave because of him. This is your family too." The statement hit Willow like a punch to the gut. Your family too. She'd thought that once, had believed she belonged here, but that was before Alexander had made it clear that she and their unborn child were obstacles to his ambitions rather than reasons to build a life. "Willow, please." Alexander stepped forward again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" Willow turned to face him fully, and her calm composure was more devastating than any tantrum could have been. "Explain how you told me that maybe we'd moved too fast, that maybe marriage was a mistake. Explain how you said you weren't ready to be a father the same night I showed you the ultrasound pictures." Margaret gasped audibly. "Alexander, you didn't." "I was scared," Alexander said, his voice cracking. "I was terrified, and I handled it all wrong." "Scared?" Willow let out a bitter laugh. "I was scared too. I was 28 years old, pregnant with my first child, dealing with morning sickness so bad I couldn't work for weeks. My hormones were all over the place, my body was changing in ways that terrified me, and the one person who was supposed to support me through it all told me it was all a mistake." Tears were flowing freely down Margaret's cheeks now. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered to Willow. "I'm so sorry." "The worst part," Willow continued, her voice growing stronger even as tears began to slip down her own cheeks, "wasn't even the words. It was watching you pack your suitcase the next morning like you couldn't get away from us fast enough." Alexander flinched as if she'd struck him. "I didn't pack a suitcase. I took a few things for a business trip. A business trip that lasted 3 weeks." Willow cut him off. "And then another one. And another. Until it became clear that you'd rather live in hotels across the globe than in the same house as your pregnant wife." The room was completely silent except for Liam's soft whimpering. Blake was staring at his older brother like he'd never seen him before. Emma looked furious enough to actually hit someone. Richard was shaking his head in disappointment. "I sent money," Alexander said desperately. "I made sure all the bills were paid, that you had everything you needed." "Money?" Willow's voice rose slightly, making Liam startle. She immediately lowered her tone, soothing their son with practiced ease. "I needed my husband. I needed the father of my child. I needed someone to hold my hair when I was throwing up every morning and tell me everything was going to be okay. I was trying to provide for you," Alexander insisted. "The Singapore deal alone would have set us up for life. We were already set up for life." Willow's composure finally shattered completely. "You're worth more money than most people see in 100 lifetimes. What we needed wasn't more money. What we needed was for you to show up." Margaret stood up abruptly. "I need some air," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Richard, would you?" "Of course." Richard stood as well, placing a gentle hand on Willow's shoulder. "Sweetheart, I hope you know that if we'd had any idea what was happening, we would have been there. Every single day. The kindness in his voice nearly undid Willow completely. I know, she whispered. As Alexander's parents left the room, clearly needing space to process their son's failures, the siblings remained behind. Emma was the first to break the heavy silence. Alex, what the hell is wrong with you? Her voice was quiet, but fierce. I've watched you build a billion-dollar company from nothing. I've seen you negotiate deals that seemed impossible, but you couldn't figure out how to be there for your own family? You don't understand the pressure, Alexander started. The pressure? Emma stood up, her petite frame radiating fury. You want to talk about pressure? Try being alone in a hospital room at 3 a.m, bleeding and terrified that you're losing your baby. Try watching your newborn son struggling to breathe in an incubator while machines keep him alive. That's pressure. Liam had finally settled against Willow's chest, his tiny hand fisted in her black dress. She looked down at him, this miracle who'd fought so hard to be here, and felt the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness that had carried her through the darkest moments. He almost didn't make it, she said quietly, not looking at Alexander. His first week was touch and go. The doctors weren't sure his lungs would develop enough. I sat in that NICU chair for 16 hours a day, talking to him, reading to him, singing lullabies I'd learned from my grandmother. She lifted her head, meeting Alexander's stricken gaze directly. I held his hand through the incubator ports and promised him that his mommy would never leave him, that no matter what happened, he would always have me fighting for him. Willow, Alexander's voice was barely audible, but I couldn't promise him his daddy would be there, she continued, each word landing like a physical blow, because his daddy had already proven that running away was easier than staying and fighting for us. Alexander sank into the nearest chair, as if his legs couldn't hold him anymore. I know I failed you, I know I failed him, but I'm here now. Are you? Willow asked. Or are you here for Christmas dinner with your family, and we just happen to be an unexpected complication? The question hung in the air unanswered because they all knew the truth. Alexander hadn't come here to see his son. He'd come for the same reason he always came, because it was expected, because it was tradition, because it was easier than dealing with the messy reality of his actual life. David, who'd been quietly absorbing everything, finally spoke up. When Mom asked where you and Willow were for Thanksgiving, you said you were working. When she asked about the baby shower, you said Willow wanted something small and private. You've been lying to all of us for months. I wasn't lying, Alexander said weakly. I didn't know how to explain that you're a coward. Blake's voice was cold with disappointment. How to explain that you abandoned your pregnant wife. How to explain that you've never even held your own son before tonight. Alexander looked around the room at his siblings' faces that had always looked up to him, had always believed in him, and saw only disappointment and anger. For the first time in his adult life, all his success and wealth and charm couldn't fix the damage he'd caused. Willow adjusted Liam in her arms, preparing to leave. I should get him home. It's past his bedtime and all this stress isn't good for him. Don't go, Alexander said quickly, standing up. Please, we need to talk about this. About us. About how to move forward. Willow paused at the doorway, not turning around. There is no us anymore, Alex. You made that choice 7 months ago. There's just me and our son, and the life I've built without you. The finality in her voice was crushing, but it was the truth they all needed to hear. Alexander followed Willow into the marble foyer, his footsteps echoing with desperate urgency. She was already reaching for Liam's car seat with one hand, while balancing their son against her shoulder with the other, a practiced movement that spoke of months of doing everything alone. Willow, wait, he called out, his voice breaking slightly. Please, just 5 minutes. Let me explain what really happened. She paused with her hand on the door handle, not turning around. What really happened is that you chose yourself over us. There's nothing more to explain. That's not true, Alexander said, moving closer but stopping when he saw her shoulders tense. I was terrified, yes, but not of you or the baby. I was terrified of becoming my father. The words hung in the air between them like a confession he'd never meant to make. Willow slowly turned around, her green eyes searching his face for the truth behind the statement. Your father? She said quietly. Richard has been nothing but wonderful to me. He's kind, present, loving. Now, Alexander interrupted, he's those things now. But when I was growing up, he ran his hands through his hair, looking suddenly younger and more vulnerable. He worked 18-hour days. He missed every school play, every birthday party, every moment that mattered. I barely saw him until I was old enough to join the company. Willow frowned, remembering the warm, attentive man who'd always treated her like family. He changed. After Emma was born, Alexander nodded. He realized what he'd missed with David, Blake, and me. But by then, I was 15, and had already learned that work came before everything else. Success was more important than presence. In the living room, Alexander's siblings were clearly listening, but they remained silent, perhaps hearing this side of their brother's story for the first time. "So when you told me you were pregnant," Alexander continued, his voice growing softer, "all I could think about was how I'd turn into him, how I'd be the kind of father who provides everything except the one thing that actually matters, showing up." Liam made a soft sound against Willow's shoulder, and she instinctively adjusted his position. The gesture was so natural, so perfectly attuned to their son's needs, that it made Alexander's chest ache with recognition of how much he'd missed. "So instead of trying to be better than him," Willow said, her voice carefully controlled, "you decided to be worse. You decided not to be a father at all. I thought if I could just get ahead of the business side, if I could secure enough deals to step back later." "Later?" Willow's laugh was hollow. "Alex, there's always going to be another deal, another opportunity, another reason to delay being present for the people who love you." Margaret appeared in the doorway leading to the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. "Is everything all right out here?" "Willow was just leaving," Alexander said, defeat clear in his voice. "No," Margaret said firmly, stepping forward. "I won't let that happen. Not again." She looked at her son with a mixture of love and disappointment. "Alexander, your father and I failed you in some ways when you were young. We see that now, but that doesn't give you the right to repeat our mistakes." She turned to Willow, her voice gentle but determined. "And you, sweetheart, deserve better than to carry this burden alone. That little boy deserves to know his family." "He does know his family," Willow said softly. "He knows me. He knows my mother, who drove 8 hours to help when he came home from the hospital. He knows my sister, who stayed up all night with us when he had colic. He knows the people who showed up." The words cut deep, but Alexander forced himself to hear them. "What about the people who want to show up now?" "Wanting and doing are two different things," Willow replied. "I learned that the hard way." Emma emerged from the living room, her expression thoughtful. "Willow, can I ask you something? When Alex left, did you really think it was over forever?" Willow considered the question carefully. "Honestly, no. For the first month, I kept expecting him to come home. I thought maybe he just needed time to process everything." Her voice grew quieter. "I used to fall asleep listening for his car in the driveway." Alexander closed his eyes, the image of Willow waiting for him while he was halfway around the world, making his stomach clench with guilt. "When did you stop listening?" Emma asked gently. "When I was rushed to the hospital," Willow said simply. "I called him 16 times that night. 16 times. And every call went straight to voicemail." She looked directly at Alexander. "That's when I realized that nothing, not even our child fighting for his life, was important enough to interrupt your schedule." "The time difference?" Alexander started. "Don't." Willow cut him off sharply, making Liam stir against her shoulder. She immediately softened her voice, swaying gently to keep him calm. "Just don't. There's no time difference that explains 17 hours of silence when your wife is hemorrhaging." David appeared in the doorway, having clearly been listening. 17 hours? "I finally reached his assistant the next morning," Willow explained, her voice steady but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "She told me he was in meetings all day and had left his phone in his hotel room. She said she'd give him a message when he was free." "Jesus, Alex," Blake breathed from the living room doorway. "By the time he called back," Willow continued, "Liam had already been born. He'd already been stabilized and moved to the NICU. I'd already been through the worst night of my life completely alone." Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, my dear girl." "The doctor asked if the father would be coming," Willow said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told him I didn't know, and I meant it. I had no idea if Alex would even bother to come home for his son's birth." Alexander felt like he was suffocating. "I booked the first flight. 3 days later," Willow finished. "You booked a flight 3 days later after you finished your precious negotiations. The deals I was working on would have meant we never had to worry about money." "I wasn't worried about money." Willow's composure finally cracked completely. "I was worried about whether our son would live through the night. I was worried about whether I would survive the complications from delivery. I was worried about doing everything right as a new mother with no support system." Liam began crying in earnest now, overwhelmed by his mother's distress. Willow immediately shifted into comfort mode, her voice becoming soft and soothing as she spoke to their son. I know, baby boy. I know. Mommy's sorry for getting loud. It's okay. We're okay. Watching her calm their child with such practiced ease made Alexander realize the depth of everything he'd missed. Not just the big moments, the birth, the first days home, but all the small ones. Learning Liam's cries, understanding his needs, becoming fluent in the language of their son. I want to try, he said quietly. I want to learn. I want to be the father he deserves. Willow looked up at him, and for a moment he saw a flicker of the woman who used to believe in him, but it was gone almost immediately, replaced by the wariness of someone who'd been disappointed too many times. Trying isn't enough anymore, Alex, she said sadly. I needed you to try 7 months ago. I needed you to try when I was scared and alone and growing our baby. I needed you to try when I almost lost him, and when he was fighting to breathe, and when I was falling apart from exhaustion and postpartum anxiety. Postpartum anxiety? Alexander's face went pale. Another thing you would have known if you'd been there, Willow said simply. Another thing I handled alone. She secured Liam in his car seat and reached for the door handle again. This time, Alexander didn't try to stop her. I'll be in touch about visitation, she said without looking back. Our son deserves to know his father even if it's too late for us. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything Alexander had ever wanted but been too afraid to fight for. The silence that followed Willow's departure was deafening. Alexander stood frozen by the front door, staring at the space where she and Liam had been just moments before. Through the frosted glass, he could see the faint outline of her car backing down the driveway, taking his son away from him again. Well, Margaret said, her voice thick with disappointment. That was enlightening. Alexander turned to face his family, and the expressions looking back at him were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Not anger exactly, but something worse. Deep, profound disappointment mixed with genuine hurt on Willow's behalf. Mom, I can explain, he began. Can you? Richard's voice cut through the foyer like a blade. Can you explain to me how my son, who I raised to be honorable and responsible, could abandon his pregnant wife? Can you explain how you could miss the birth of your own child? Alexander had faced down hostile takeovers, aggressive competitors, and impossible negotiations, but nothing had ever made him feel as small as his father's quiet disappointment. You don't understand the pressure I was under, Alexander said weakly. The Singapore deal alone was worth— I don't give a damn about Singapore, Richard interrupted, his voice rising for the first time in Alexander's memory. I care about the fact that my grandson spent his first weeks of life in an incubator while his father was playing businessman on the other side of the world. Emma moved past them into the living room, shaking her head in disgust. I can't even look at you right now, Alex. That girl, that amazing, strong woman went through hell and you weren't there. She's right, Blake said following his sister. I always wondered why Willow seemed different when she called. Distant. Now I know it's because she was protecting you from us finding out what a selfish bastard you'd become. Alexander followed them into the living room, desperate to make them understand. I was scared. We heard that part, David said coldly. You were scared of becoming Dad. So instead you became worse than Dad ever was. At least he was physically present, even if he was emotionally absent. Margaret sank onto the couch, looking older than Alexander had ever seen her. How could you lie to us for 7 months? Every time I asked about Willow and the baby, you deflected. I thought maybe you were just being private about new parenthood. I wasn't lying. You told us Willow was fine, Emma said, her voice shaking with fury. You told us the baby was healthy and that you were adjusting to being parents. You let us think everything was perfect while that poor girl was struggling with postpartum anxiety and raising a premature baby alone. The weight of his deception was crushing. Alexander had convinced himself that keeping his family in the dark was protecting everyone, protecting them from worry, protecting himself from judgment, protecting Willow from having to explain their separation. But all he'd really done was isolate her further and rob his son of extended family support during the most crucial months of his life. Where have you been living? Margaret asked suddenly. Alexander hesitated. The downtown penthouse. The corporate apartment? Richard's voice was flat with disbelief. You've been living in a corporate apartment for 7 months instead of in your home with your family? It wasn't my home anymore, Alexander said quietly. Willow made it clear she didn't want me there. Because you told her your marriage was a mistake, Emma shot back. Because you told a pregnant woman that you weren't ready to be a father. What did you expect? That she'd beg you to stay and hurt her more? Alexander slumped into a chair, finally allowing himself to truly absorb what he'd done. He'd spent 7 months justifying his choices, telling himself he was protecting everyone, that he was making the responsible decision by focusing on financial security. But sitting here, facing his family's disappointment, and remembering the pain in Willow's eyes, he couldn't hide from the truth anymore. He'd run away, plain and simple. He'd been terrified of the responsibility, terrified of failing as a husband and father, and instead of fighting through that fear, he'd chosen the coward's way out. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "You can't," Blake said bluntly. "Some things can't be fixed, Alex. Some damage is permanent. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try," Margaret added, though her voice lacked its usual warmth. "That little boy is your son. Willow is—" She paused, seeming to struggle with how to define their relationship now. "She's the mother of your child. She deserves respect and support regardless of what happens between you two." "She said she'd arrange visitation," Alexander said, grasping for hope. "Visitation?" Richard repeated, the word heavy with irony. "You went from being a husband and father to being a weekend visitor in your child's life." The reality hit Alexander like a physical blow. He'd imagined that somehow, someday, he could make everything right again, that he could win Willow back, that they could be a family, that his momentary panic wouldn't have permanent consequences. But looking at his family's faces, thinking about the pain in Willow's voice, he was beginning to understand that some choices couldn't be undone. "She looked so tired," Margaret said softly, tears starting fresh in her eyes. "Did you see how thin she's gotten? And the way she held that baby, like she's been holding him alone for months." "She has been holding him alone," Emma said harshly. "While Alex was gallivanting around the globe, she was probably getting 3 hours of sleep a night and wondering how she was going to pay for formula and doctor visits." "I sent money," Alexander protested. "I made sure all the accounts were—" "Money isn't presents," David interrupted. "Money isn't holding your wife's hand during contractions. Money isn't being there when your son takes his first breath or stops breathing and needs to be resuscitated." "Stops breathing?" Alexander's blood ran cold. "Did you think premature babies in the NICU were just there for fun?" Blake asked sarcastically. "They're there because their lives hang in the balance every single day." Alexander thought he might be sick. While he'd been celebrating closed deals and successful meetings, his son had been fighting for his life. While he'd been enjoying 5-star hotels and business dinners, Willow had been sitting vigil beside an incubator, probably terrified and alone. "I need to see him," Alexander said, suddenly standing up. "I need to see my son." "Right now?" Margaret asked. "Alex, it's almost 9 o'clock at night. That baby should be going to bed." "And Willow made it very clear that showing up uninvited isn't welcome," Emma added. "You lost the right to surprise visits when you moved out." Alexander felt trapped by the consequences of his own actions. For 7 months, he'd been able to avoid the reality of what he'd walked away from. He'd thrown himself into work, traveled constantly, convinced himself that he was doing the responsible thing by building financial security for a future reconciliation he'd always assumed was inevitable. But tonight had shattered those delusions. Tonight he'd seen the depth of the damage he'd caused, felt the weight of everything he'd missed, understood that Willow had built a life that didn't include him, not because she didn't love him, but because she'd had to. "She used to look at me like I hung the moon," he said quietly, more to himself than to his family. "And you proved that you didn't," Margaret replied sadly. "You proved that when it mattered most, when she needed you most, you weren't the man she thought you were." Alexander closed his eyes, remembering the early days of their relationship, how Willow's face would light up when he walked into a room, how she'd believed in him completely, supported his ambitions, made him feel like he could accomplish anything. He'd taken that faith, that love, and destroyed it with his own fear and selfishness. "I love her," he said, the words feeling inadequate and too late. "Love isn't enough," Richard said firmly. "Love without action is just words, and words don't raise babies or heal hearts that have been broken by abandonment." The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9 times, each note echoing through the room like a funeral bell tolling for everything Alexander had lost through his own choices. 3 days after Christmas, Alexander sat in his car outside Willow's apartment building at 6:30 in the morning, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He'd been there for 2 hours, waiting for any sign of movement behind the third-floor windows where his son was learning to exist in the world without him. This was his 4th morning of the same routine: drive to her neighborhood, park across the street, and try to catch a glimpse of the life he'd abandoned. He knew it was borderline stalking. He knew Willow would be furious if she spotted him, but he couldn't stay away. Yesterday, he'd seen her briefly through the window, walking back and forth with Liam against her shoulder. Even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion in her movements, the way she swayed constantly to keep their son calm. She was wearing what looked like the same clothes from 2 days before, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that suggested sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Beijing meeting moved to 9 a.m. Car will be there in 20 minutes. Alexander stared at the message, then at the building where his family lived without him. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. Business came first. Deals waited for no one. And missing a meeting with international investors would have been unthinkable. He typed back, "Cancel Beijing. Cancel everything for the week. I need time." His assistant's response came immediately. "Sir, the Beijing deal is worth $400 million. Are you sure?" Alexander looked up at Willow's window again, remembering her words from Christmas night. There's always going to be another deal. She'd been right. There would always be another Singapore, another Beijing, another opportunity that seemed urgent and irreplaceable until the next one came along. "I'm sure. Handle it." He was about to drive away when the building's front door opened and Willow emerged, looking harried and juggling a diaper bag, her purse and Liam's car seat. She was struggling with the weight of everything, trying to navigate the icy front steps while keeping the baby stable. Alexander was out of his car before he'd consciously made the decision to move. "Let me help," he called out, jogging across the street. Willow froze at the sound of his voice, then turned around slowly. Her face cycled through surprise, wariness, and finally exhaustion too deep for anger. "Alex, what are you doing here?" He hesitated, realizing how the truth would sound. "I was hoping to see you." To see him. Willow's eyes narrowed as she took in his expensive car parked across the street. The fact that he was dressed in a business suit at 6:30 in the morning. "Have you been watching my apartment?" The accusation hung between them, and Alexander knew that lying would only make things worse. "Not watching, just hoping for a chance to talk." "This isn't talking," Willow said, shifting Liam's car seat to her other hand. "This is stalking." "You're right," Alexander admitted immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't know how else to reach you. You haven't returned my calls." "Because I have nothing to say to you right now," Willow replied, but her voice lacked the sharp edge it had carried on Christmas night. She just sounded tired, bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. Alexander noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her coat hung loose on her frame, the slight tremor in her hands that could have been from cold or exhaustion or both. "Where are you going?" he asked gently. "Maybe I could drive you." "Liam has a pediatrician appointment," Willow said, then immediately looked like she regretted sharing the information. "Is everything okay? Is he sick?" For a moment, Willow's maternal instincts overrode her anger with him. "He's fine. It's just a regular checkup. Weight check mostly. Premature babies need more frequent monitoring for the first year." "Can I?" Alexander took a careful step closer. "Can I come with you?" Willow stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "Come with me?" "To the appointment. I know I have no right to ask, but I want to learn about his care routine. I want to understand what he needs." "You want to understand what he needs?" Willow's voice rose slightly, making Liam stir in his carrier. She immediately lowered her tone, soothing their son with practiced ease. "What he needs is consistency, Alex. What he needs is someone who shows up every day, not just when it's convenient." "I know that," Alexander said quietly. "I'm trying to be that person now." "Are you?" Willow challenged. "Or are you going to disappear again the moment work calls? The moment things get difficult or boring or routine?" Alexander thought about the Beijing meeting he'd just canceled, about the messages from his assistant that he was ignoring, about the empire he'd built that seemed suddenly insignificant compared to this conversation on a snowy sidewalk with his estranged wife and son. "I canceled a $400 million deal to be here," he said. Willow blinked in surprise. "What?" "This morning. I was supposed to be in Beijing by 9. I canceled it." "Alex," Willow's expression softened slightly, but wariness remained. "You can't just cancel one meeting and expect everything to be forgiven." "I'm not expecting anything," Alexander said. "I'm asking for a chance. One chance to prove that I can be the father Liam deserves." Willow studied his face for a long moment, and Alexander held his breath, waiting for her decision. Finally, she sighed. "One appointment," she said. "You can come to this one appointment. But if you check your phone even once, If you take a single business call, if you give me any indication that work is more important than being present for our son, this is the last chance you'll get. Understood, Alexander said immediately. And this doesn't mean anything about us. Willow continued, her voice firm despite the exhaustion. This is about Liam having the opportunity to know his father. Nothing more. Nothing more, Alexander agreed, though the words felt like swallowing glass. Willow seemed to realize she was still struggling with the car seat and diaper bag. I was going to take the bus, she said quietly. The bus? Alexander looked at her small, beat-up Honda Civic parked nearby. Why not drive? Car won't start, Willow said, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Battery died 2 days ago and I haven't had a chance to get it fixed. Alexander thought about his sleek BMW sitting across the street, about the fact that he owned more cars than he could drive while Willow was taking public transportation with a premature baby in December. The disparity between their circumstances hit him like a physical blow. Let me drive you, he said, please. Willow hesitated for another moment, then nodded. Fine, but we take my car seat. I'm not putting Liam in a vehicle that hasn't been properly baby-proofed. As they transferred the car seat to Alexander's BMW, he watched Willow check and double-check every strap and buckle with the kind of careful attention that spoke of hard-earned expertise. She knew exactly how to position everything for maximum safety, how to test the installation, how to ensure their son was perfectly secure. How did you learn all this? He asked quietly. YouTube videos, Willow said without looking up. The NICU nurses taught me the basics, but I spent hours watching tutorials about car seat safety, proper installation, everything. When you're responsible for keeping a premature baby safe, you don't take any chances. The casual way she mentioned being alone for all of it, the learning, the worrying, the sleepless research into every detail of infant care, made Alexander's chest tighten with regret. As they drove to the pediatrician's office, Liam began fussing in his car seat. Without hesitation, Willow reached back to gently stroke his cheek, making soft shushing sounds that immediately calmed him. Is he okay? Alexander asked, glancing in the rearview mirror with concern. He doesn't like car rides yet, Willow explained. His nervous system is still developing. Loud noises, sudden movements, changes in environment, everything affects him more than it would a full-term baby. Alexander absorbed this information, adding it to the growing list of things he didn't know about his own son. Things Willow had learned through trial and error, through midnight panic and careful observation, through the kind of devoted attention that only came from being someone's entire world. Willow, he said quietly as they pulled into the medical building's parking lot, I want you to know that I'm not here to disrupt your life or make things harder for you. I just want to be part of his life, however small a part that might be. Willow was quiet for a long moment, watching Liam sleep peacefully in his car seat. The hardest part, she said finally, wasn't that you left. It was that you left and I still loved you. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest and more painful than any accusation could have been. The pediatrician's office was painted in cheerful pastels with cartoon animals dancing across the walls, but the atmosphere between Alexander and Willow remained thick with unresolved tension. They sat in the waiting room with careful space between them, Liam sleeping peacefully in his carrier despite the soft chaos of other children playing nearby. Alexander watched Willow fill out forms with practiced efficiency, her handwriting neat and decisive on questions about feeding schedules, sleep patterns, and developmental milestones. Every answer revealed how thoroughly she knew their son, information that should have been shared knowledge between parents but instead highlighted the vast gap in his understanding of Liam's daily reality. Liam Westbrook? A nurse called from the doorway. Willow stood immediately, gathering the diaper bag and carrier with movements that spoke of countless similar appointments. Alexander followed, feeling like an outsider in his own son's life. Dr. Martinez was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who greeted Willow with the warmth of familiarity. How's our little fighter doing and who do we have here? She looked at Alexander with polite curiosity. This is Alexander, Liam's father, Willow said quietly, and Alexander caught the slight hesitation before the word father, as if she wasn't entirely sure he'd earned the title. Wonderful to finally meet you, Dr. Martinez said, though her tone remained professionally neutral. I've heard so much about Liam's progress from Mom here. She's been absolutely devoted. Alexander felt the weight of everything implied in that statement. While Willow had been building relationships with their son's medical team, learning his needs, advocating for his care, Alexander had been a ghost in Liam's medical history. Let's get this little man on the scale, Dr. Martinez said, lifting Liam from his carrier with practiced ease. "How's he been eating, Willow?" "Better this week," Willow replied, moving to help undress Liam. "He's taking about 4 ounces every 2 hours during the day, 3 hours at night when I'm lucky." Alexander watched his son squirm on the scale, tiny and perfect but still so much smaller than full-term babies his age. Liam's ribs were visible beneath translucent skin, and his limbs had the delicate quality of something that had arrived in the world before he was fully ready. 11 pounds, 2 ounces, Dr. Martinez announced, making notes on Liam's chart. "That's excellent progress. He's gained almost 6 ounces since last week." 6 ounces? Alexander asked, surprised that such a small amount could be significant. "For a premature baby, consistent weight gain is crucial," Dr. Martinez explained. "Their digestive systems are still maturing, so every ounce represents successful development." As the examination continued, Alexander found himself fascinated and terrified in equal measure. Dr. Martinez listened to Liam's lungs with extra attention, checking for signs of respiratory distress that apparently remained a concern for premature babies. She examined his reflexes, measured his head circumference, assessed his muscle tone with gentle movements that made Liam fuss softly. "His lung function has improved dramatically," Dr. Martinez told Willow. "The breathing episodes have decreased significantly since last month." "Breathing episodes?" Alexander interrupted, his voice sharp with concern. Willow and Dr. Martinez exchanged a look that clearly communicated their shared history of dealing with Liam's health challenges without him. "Apnea of prematurity," Dr. Martinez explained gently. "It's common in babies born as early as Liam was. Sometimes their brains forget to tell them to breathe, especially during sleep." Alexander felt the room tilt slightly. "Forget to breathe? It's usually not dangerous if caught quickly," Dr. Martinez continued, "but it requires constant monitoring. Willow has become quite expert at recognizing the signs and stimulating him to resume breathing." The casual way she mentioned Willow's expertise in preventing their son from suffocating made Alexander's blood run cold. While he'd been sleeping in luxury hotel beds around the world, Willow had been staying awake night after night, watching their baby breathe, ready to act if his fragile respiratory system failed. "How often?" he asked quietly. "It was several times a week at first," Willow said, not meeting his eyes. "Now maybe once a week, usually when he's overtired or overstimulated." Alexander thought about Christmas night, about the stress and raised voices in his family's living room, about how Liam had become increasingly fussy as the evening progressed. Had they put their son at risk without even realizing it? "The monitor helps," Dr. Martinez said, gesturing to a small device in the diaper bag that Alexander hadn't noticed before. "It alerts if his breathing or heart rate becomes irregular." "You sleep with a monitor?" Alexander looked at Willow with growing understanding of the constant vigilance her life required. "When I sleep," Willow said simply, and the matter-of-fact way she mentioned the conditional nature of her rest made Alexander's heart clench. Dr. Martinez continued the examination, checking Liam's eyes, his reflexes, the soft spot on his head that seemed impossibly vulnerable. Each assessment revealed new complexities in his son's care that Alexander had never imagined. "Now," Dr. Martinez said, settling into her chair with Liam calm and redressed in Willow's arms, "I want to discuss some developmental concerns I've been monitoring." "Concerns?" Willow's voice sharpened with immediate maternal alarm. "Nothing immediately worrying," Dr. Martinez assured her quickly. "But Liam is showing some signs of potential developmental delays that we often see in premature babies." Alexander felt his world tilt again. "What kind of delays?" "His muscle tone is slightly lower than we'd like to see, and his visual tracking isn't quite where it should be for his corrected age," Dr. Martinez explained. "It's very common and often resolves with early intervention, but I'd like to refer you to a pediatric physical therapist and possibly a developmental specialist." Willow nodded, already pulling out her phone to take notes. "How early can we start intervention?" "Immediately," Dr. Martinez said. "The earlier we address these concerns, the better his long-term outcomes. Physical therapy can help with muscle tone, and there are exercises you can do at home to encourage proper development." Alexander watched Willow absorb this information with the kind of determined calm that he was beginning to recognize as her default response to challenges. She wasn't panicking or falling apart. She was already mentally organizing how to handle this new layer of complexity in their son's care. "Will insurance cover the therapy?" Willow asked, and Alexander caught the underlying worry in her voice. "Most of it," Dr. Martinez replied, "though there might be some out-of-pocket cost for specialized services." Alexander wanted to say that money wasn't an issue, that he would pay for anything Liam needed, but he sensed that offering financial solutions right now would only highlight how absent he'd been from these conversations before. "I'll handle the referrals," Dr. Martinez continued, "but I want both of you to understand that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Premature babies often catch up to their peers, but it takes time and consistency. Both of us?" Willow glanced at Alexander with surprise. "Co-parenting a child with special needs, even temporary ones, requires teamwork," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "Liam will benefit from having both parents involved in his care and therapy." Alexander felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Dr. Martinez was giving him an opening, a way to be genuinely useful in his son's life rather than just a weekend visitor. But it also meant stepping into a world of medical appointments, therapy sessions, and constant vigilance that felt overwhelming in its complexity. "I want to be involved," he said quietly, looking at Willow rather than Dr. Martinez. "If you'll let me." Willow studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her weighing his words against 7 months of abandonment. "Liam needs consistency," she said finally. "If you're going to be part of his care team, you have to actually be present. Not traveling, not in meetings, not distracted by work. Present. I understand. Do you?" Willow's voice carried the weight of every broken promise, every missed call, every moment she'd faced alone. "Because this isn't just doctor's appointments, Alex. This is 2 a.m. breathing episodes. This is physical therapy 3 times a week. This is learning to read his cues, understanding his needs, being awake when he's awake and vigilant when he's sleeping." Alexander looked down at his son, peaceful now in Willow's arms but carrying invisible challenges that would require years of dedicated attention. The magnitude of what he'd walked away from was becoming clearer with every revelation. "I want to learn," he said. "I want to be the father he needs." Dr. Martinez smiled slightly, apparently sensing the gravity of the conversation happening in her examination room. "Well then," she said, "let's start with scheduling that first physical therapy appointment. And I want to see Liam again in 2 weeks to monitor his progress." As they left the office with new referrals, therapy schedules, and a deeper understanding of Liam's needs, Alexander realized that this was what real parenthood looked like, not the occasional photo opportunity or weekend visit he'd vaguely imagined, but a complex, demanding, round-the-clock commitment to another person's well-being. The question that terrified him most wasn't whether he could handle it, but whether Willow would trust him enough to try. 2 weeks had passed since the pediatrician's appointment, and Alexander had kept his word in ways that surprised even him. He'd attended every physical therapy session, learned to recognize Liam's hunger cues, and mastered the art of supporting his son's neck during feeding. More importantly, he'd turned off his phone during every visit, declined 3 international trips, and delegated responsibilities he'd never trusted to anyone else before. Willow had begun to relax incrementally around him, allowing him to hold Liam for longer periods, even letting him help with diaper changes and feeding routines. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the tentative beginning of co-parenting. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was the first time Willow had agreed to let Alexander watch Liam alone while she attended her postpartum support group. It was only for 2 hours, but for Alexander, it felt like the most important job interview of his life. "His next bottle is in the refrigerator," Willow said for the 3rd time, checking items off a detailed list she'd written. "Warm it in the bottle warmer for exactly 90 seconds. Test it on your wrist before giving it to him." "I know," Alexander said gently, watching her nervous energy with understanding rather than impatience. "We've practiced this. The breathing monitor is set to alarm if his heart rate drops below 80 or goes above 160, Willow continued, adjusting the small device clipped to Liam's onesie. "If it goes off, check if he's actually breathing first. Sometimes it's just a false alarm from movement." Alexander nodded, absorbing the instruction while trying not to think about the implications of the word sometimes. "And if he has an apnea episode?" he asked, wanting to hear the protocol again. "Gentle stimulation first," Willow recited, demonstrating on Liam's chest. "Rub his back, stroke his cheek, talk to him. If he doesn't respond within 10 seconds, pick him up and gently bounce him. If that doesn't work, call 911 and start infant CPR," Alexander finished, the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical thing. Willow looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her internal struggle. She'd been Liam's sole protector for months, the only person responsible for keeping him safe and healthy. Trusting someone else, even his father, With that responsibility went against every maternal instinct that had kept their son alive. "I can stay," she said suddenly. "The support group meets every week. I don't have to go tonight." "Yes, you do," Alexander said firmly. "When's the last time you left this apartment for something that was just for you?" Willow's silence was answer enough. Alexander had learned over the past 2 weeks that her entire world had shrunk to the size of this small apartment, revolving entirely around Liam's needs. She hadn't mentioned friends, hobbies, or any activities that didn't involve their son's care. 2 hours, she said finally, reaching for her purse. "I'll have my phone on the entire time." "Go," Alexander said, settling into the rocking chair that had become his usual spot for feeding. "We'll be fine." After Willow left, the apartment felt different, quieter but somehow more weighted with responsibility. Liam was awake but content, his blue eyes tracking Alexander's movements with increasing recognition. Over the past 2 weeks, Alexander had become a familiar presence in his son's limited world. "Just you and me tonight, buddy," Alexander said softly, adjusting Liam in his arms. "What do you think? Should we work on that tummy time Dr. Martinez wants you to practice?" He was spreading a soft blanket on the floor when his phone rang. The sound made Liam startle slightly, and Alexander quickly declined the call without looking at who it was. But the phone rang again immediately, then a third time. Alexander glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop. It was his business partner, calling from Singapore where it was early morning. The Beijing deal he'd canceled 2 weeks ago had apparently fallen through completely, and there were complications with their Asian expansion that only Alexander could handle. He let it go to voicemail, but the phone buzzed immediately with a text. "Emergency. Company board called meeting for tomorrow. If you're not there, they're voting you out. Everything we've built is at risk." Alexander stared at the message, his mind racing. 5 years of work, hundreds of employees, investors who trusted him with their money. It could all disappear if he didn't get on a plane tonight. The rational part of his brain was already calculating flight times and boardroom strategies. Then Liam made a soft sound, and Alexander looked down to see his son watching him with those serious blue eyes that were so much like his own. "What do you think, Liam?" he whispered. "Should Daddy go save his empire? Or should he stay here and help you practice lifting your head?" As if in response, Liam's face scrunched up and he began to cry. Not the sharp wail that indicated hunger or pain, but the tired, overwhelming cry that meant he was overstimulated and needed comfort. Alexander immediately put down his phone and lifted Liam, holding him against his chest and swaying gently. "Shh, it's okay. Daddy's here." The word daddy still felt foreign on his tongue, but less so than it had 2 weeks ago. He was beginning to understand that being a father wasn't just a title you claimed. It was something you became through countless small moments of showing up. His phone buzzed again with another urgent message, but Alexander ignored it, focusing entirely on soothing his son. He walked to the window, pointing out the streetlights and cars below, his voice soft and steady as he described everything he could see. "That's Mrs. Patterson from down the street walking her dog," he murmured. "She always waves at you when Mommy takes you for walks. And that blue car belongs to the college student in 2B. He works nights at the hospital." Gradually, Liam's crying subsided, replaced by the kind of focused attention that Dr. Martinez had said was crucial for his visual development. Alexander found himself genuinely enjoying this simple interaction, more engaged than he'd ever been in any boardroom negotiation. His phone rang again, and this time the sound made Liam startle so violently that his breathing monitor alarm went off. The sharp beeping filled the apartment, and Alexander felt his heart stop as he realized Liam had gone completely still in his arms. "Come on, buddy," Alexander said, trying to keep his voice calm while gently rubbing Liam's back. "Breathe for Daddy. Come on." 10 seconds felt like 10 hours. Alexander was reaching for his phone to call 911 when Liam suddenly gasped and resumed breathing normally, his color returning as oxygen filled his tiny lungs. The breathing monitor stopped its alarm, but Alexander was shaking as he held his son close. The phone was still ringing, the urgent messages still coming, but all of that seemed impossibly insignificant compared to the miracle of Liam's steady breathing against his chest. He turned off his phone completely. For the next hour and a half, Alexander gave Liam his complete attention. They practiced tummy time on the soft blanket, with Alexander cheering each time his son managed to lift his head for a few seconds. They worked on visual tracking with a colorful toy that Willow had positioned just right to encourage focus. Alexander fed him a bottle, burped him with patience learned through trial and error, and changed a diaper that was somehow both routine and remarkable. When Willow returned from her support group, She found them both asleep in the rocking chair, Liam peaceful against Alexander's chest, Alexander's hand protectively cupped around their son's back. "How did it go?" she asked quietly, not wanting to wake Liam. Alexander opened his eyes, immediately alert in the way of new parents. "Good," he said softly. He had one breathing episode, but he came out of it quickly. "We did tummy time," and he held his head up for almost 5 seconds. 5 seconds? Willow's face lit up with pride. "That's the longest yet." "Your phone was buzzing earlier," Willow mentioned, noticing the device face down on the coffee table. "I hope it wasn't important." Alexander looked at his silent phone, thinking about the board meeting he was missing, the empire that might crumble without his intervention, the 5 years of work that could disappear by morning. Then he looked at his son, breathing steadily in his arms, and felt something shift permanently in his chest. "Nothing was more important than this," he said, and for the first time in his adult life, he meant it completely. Willow studied his face in the dim light of the apartment, and Alexander saw something in her expression he hadn't seen since before Liam was born, a flicker of the woman who used to believe in him completely. "Alexander," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about tonight." "What about tonight?" "There was no support group meeting," Willow admitted. I needed to see if you would really choose him over everything else, if you would really be here when it mattered." Alexander felt the weight of the test he'd unknowingly passed, understanding that this moment had been about much more than just babysitting. It had been about proving that when everything else demanded his attention, he would choose his family. "And?" he asked quietly. Willow was quiet for a long moment, watching Liam sleep peacefully in his father's arms. "And I think," she said finally, "maybe we can try to figure this out together." 6 weeks later, Alexander sat in the sterile waiting room of the children's hospital, his hands clasped tightly together as he watched Willow pace back and forth with barely contained anxiety. Liam had been rushed into emergency surgery after his latest breathing episode had escalated into something far more serious than they'd ever experienced before. "They said it would only take an hour," Willow said for the 4th time, checking her watch. "It's been almost 2 hours. Alexander wanted to comfort her, but the truth was that he was just as terrified. Over the past month and a half, he'd become intimately familiar with Liam's medical needs, had learned to read every sign and symptom, had even successfully handled several breathing episodes on his own. But this morning had been different, more severe, lasting longer, requiring an ambulance ride that had tested every prayer Alexander had ever learned. Mr. and Mrs. Westbrook, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, still wearing surgical scrubs, her expression carefully neutral. Willow immediately stopped pacing. "How is he?" "The surgery was successful," Dr. Martinez said, and Alexander felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "We were able to correct the issue with his airway that was causing the severe apnea episodes. He should recover fully." "Should?" Alexander caught the conditional word immediately. "With premature babies, we always remain cautious," Dr. Martinez explained. "But his prognosis is excellent. The surgery should eliminate the breathing episodes entirely, and we expect him to develop normally from this point forward." Willow sank into the nearest chair, tears streaming down her face. Alexander moved to her side instinctively, and for the first time in 9 months she didn't pull away when he put his arm around her shoulders. "Can we see him?" she asked. "He's in recovery now, but you can visit in about 30 minutes. He'll be groggy from the anesthesia, but he should be fully awake by this evening." After Dr. Martinez left, Alexander and Willow sat in silence, processing the relief and exhaustion that followed hours of terror. It was Alexander who finally spoke. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "This morning, when we were in the ambulance, all I could think about was how I almost missed this, how I almost missed being here for the most important moments of his life." Willow looked at him with tired eyes. "Alex, no, let me finish," he said gently. "I spent so many years thinking that providing money was the same thing as providing love. That building financial security was how you showed you cared about your family's future." He paused, gathering the courage for what he needed to say next. "But watching you these past weeks, seeing how you've been his entire world, understanding what real commitment looks like, I realized that I was never building security for us. I was building walls to hide behind." "What are you saying?" Willow's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that I want to be the man you needed me to be 9 months ago," Alexander said. "I want to be the father Liam deserves. And I want to be the husband who shows up for the hard stuff, not just the celebrations." Willow was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with the kind of careful attention she usually reserved for monitoring Liam's breathing. "You can't just decide to be different, Alex," she said finally. "Trust isn't rebuilt with words. It's rebuilt with consistent actions over time." "I know that," Alexander replied, "which is why I need to tell you what I did yesterday." Willow raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I sold my shares in the company." The statement hung in the air between them like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. "You what?" Willow's voice rose slightly. "I sold my controlling shares to my business partners," Alexander explained. "I'll still be involved as a consultant, but I won't be running day-to-day operations. No more 18-hour days, no more international travel, no more choosing between family and business." Willow stared at him in shock. "Alex, that company was your life. You built it from nothing." "It was never my life," Alexander said, his voice gaining strength. "It was my excuse for not living my actual life, for not being present for the people who mattered. But the money, we have more money than we could spend in 3 lifetimes," Alexander interrupted gently. "What we didn't have was time together. What Liam didn't have was a father who was actually present." Willow's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different from the fear-based tears she'd shed earlier. These carried the weight of possibilities she'd been afraid to hope for. "What does this mean for us?" she asked quietly. Alexander took her hands in his, noting how they were still slightly shaky from the stress of the morning. "It means I want to come home," he said. "It means I want to wake up at 2 a.m. when Liam cries and take turns walking him back to sleep. It means I want to attend every doctor's appointment, every therapy session, every small moment that makes up a life together." "Alex," Willow's voice wavered. "It means I want to be married to you again, not just legally but actually," Alexander continued. "I want to be your partner in all of this, the scary parts and the beautiful parts and the exhausting parts that somehow make it all worthwhile." Before Willow could respond, a nurse appeared to tell them they could see Liam. They walked down the hospital corridor together, and Alexander noticed that for the first time in months there was no careful distance between them. In the recovery room, Liam was sleeping peacefully, looking impossibly small in the hospital bed but breathing with an ease that hadn't been present since his birth. Willow immediately moved to his side, stroking his soft hair and whispering words of comfort, even though he couldn't hear them yet. Alexander stood on the other side of the bed watching his family, because that's what they were, regardless of the legal paperwork or living arrangements. They were a family, bound together by love and commitment, and the fierce protectiveness that parenthood demanded. "He looks peaceful," Alexander said softly. "He looks perfect," Willow replied, then looked up at Alexander with an expression he'd been afraid he might never see again. "We all look perfect." As if he could hear his mother's voice, Liam's eyes fluttered open, immediately seeking familiar faces. When his gaze found both his parents standing over him, his mouth curved in what might have been his first real smile. "Did you see that?" Willow gasped. "His first smile," Alexander breathed, feeling his chest fill with an emotion too big for words. "For both of us," Willow said, reaching across Liam's bed to take Alexander's hand. "His first smile was for both of us together." Alexander squeezed her fingers gently, understanding that this moment was both an ending and a beginning, the end of 9 months of separation and pain, and the beginning of something harder but infinitely more worthwhile, the daily work of building a life together, one small choice at a time. "So," he said quietly, his eyes moving between his wife and son, "what happens now?" Willow smiled, and it was the first time Alexander had seen her face completely free of the worry and exhaustion that had marked the past months. "Now," she said, "we go home, all of us, and we figure out how to be a family." Outside the hospital window, snow was beginning to fall, not the harsh, bitter snow of that Christmas night when everything had seemed broken beyond repair, but the gentle, promising snow of late winter that carried hints of spring to come. 18 months later, the afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen windows of their renovated home, casting golden light across the hardwood floors where Liam sat surrounded by colorful blocks, babbling happily as he stacked them with the determined focus of a toddler who had long since left his premature birth behind. Willow stood at the kitchen island, editing photos on her laptop, images from a wedding she'd shot the previous weekend. After months of Alexander's encouragement and support, she'd slowly rebuilt her photography business, this time with the flexibility to work around their family's schedule. "Dada, Dada," Liam called out, his voice clear and strong as he held up a red block triumphantly. Alexander looked up from the proposal he was reviewing. a consulting contract that would keep him in town and allow him to work primarily from home. His face lit up with the kind of unguarded joy that had become his default expression whenever Liam achieved a new milestone. "That's amazing, buddy," Alexander said, setting aside his work completely to join his son on the floor. "You built a tower." Liam giggled with delight, immediately knocking down his creation so he could start building again. The simple sound of his laughter still had the power to stop both Alexander and Willow in their tracks, a reminder of how miraculous it was to have their healthy, thriving son filling their home with noise and chaos and unconditional love. "He's been doing that for 20 minutes, Willow said, smiling as she watched Alexander help Liam arrange the blocks in new patterns. "I think he likes the sound they make when they fall." "Smart kid," Alexander replied, deliberately knocking over his own tower to make Liam squeal with laughter. "Sometimes the best part is watching something fall down so you can build it back up again." The comment carried weight beyond the simple game, and Willow felt the familiar flutter of gratitude for the man her husband had become. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy. There had been difficult conversations, therapy sessions to work through their trust issues, and countless small moments where Alexander had to choose their family over his old habits. But he'd shown up for all of it, proving with daily actions that his commitment was genuine. "Mama, look!" Liam had managed to stack 3 blocks in a wobbly tower, his face glowing with pride at his accomplishment. "I see, sweetheart." Willow abandoned her laptop to join them on the floor, marveling at how natural this felt now. The 3 of them together, no underlying tension or careful distance, just the comfortable intimacy of family life. Liam was a different child than the fragile baby who'd spent his first weeks in the NICU. The surgery had eliminated his breathing episodes completely, and months of physical therapy had strengthened his muscle tone until he was meeting all his developmental milestones right on schedule. His pediatrician had officially declared him caught up to his full-term peers, with no lasting effects from his premature birth. "I have news," Alexander said, settling cross-legged beside them with Liam immediately crawling into his lap. "Good news or bad news?" Willow asked, though his expression suggested it was positive. "The Morrison Group accepted my consulting proposal," Alexander said, unable to hide his excitement. "They want me to help design work-life balance policies for tech executives. Apparently, my experience with recovering from workaholism makes me uniquely qualified." Willow laughed, remembering how that phrase had come up during one of their therapy sessions. "You're going to help other people learn to be present with their families. Ironic, right?" Alexander grinned. "But I figure if I can go from missing my son's birth to being the dad who knows exactly when his nap time is, maybe I can help other people figure it out too." Liam chose that moment to stand up in Alexander's lap, his chubby hands gripping his father's shirt for balance. At 15 months old, he was walking confidently and had recently started trying to run, though his attempts usually ended with him sitting down abruptly and looking surprised. "Speaking of news," Willow said, her voice carrying a note that made Alexander look at her more closely, "I have something to tell you too." "What kind of something?" Alexander asked, his attention fully focused on her in the way that had become second nature to him. Willow reached into her camera bag and pulled out a small white stick, placing it on the coffee table where Alexander could see the 2 pink lines clearly displayed. Alexander stared at it for a moment, processing the information. "Are you 8 weeks?" Willow confirmed, her voice soft with wonder and just a hint of nervousness. "I found out yesterday." For a moment, Alexander was silent, and Willow felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. But when he looked up at her, his eyes were bright with tears and an expression of pure joy that erased any doubts about his reaction. 8 weeks, he repeated, as if testing how the words felt. "We're having another baby." "We are," Willow said, watching his face carefully. "How do you feel about that?" Alexander looked down at Liam, who was now trying to eat one of his blocks, then back at Willow with an expression of complete certainty. "I feel like the luckiest man alive," he said simply. "I get to be present for this one from the very beginning. I get to be the husband you need and the father both of our children deserve." "Both?" Willow smiled, placing her hand on her still flat stomach. "Getting ahead of yourself there." "Not getting ahead," Alexander said, reaching over to cover her hand with his. "Just planning to show up for every single moment this time." Liam, apparently sensing that something important was happening, looked back and forth between his parents with the serious expression he wore when he was trying to understand adult conversation. "What do you think, Liam?" Willow asked, lifting him from Alexander's lap to settle him between them. "Would you like to be a big brother?" Liam babbled something that sounded vaguely like agreement, then leaned forward to pat Willow's stomach with the gentle touch they'd taught him for handling delicate things. "I think that's a yes," Alexander said, watching his son with the kind of focused attention that had become his trademark as a father. As the afternoon light shifted and stretched across their living room, the three of them sat together on the floor surrounded by colorful blocks and the comfortable chaos of family life. Willow felt the deep contentment that came from knowing, absolutely and without doubt, that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. "Alexander," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something. Anything. Do you ever regret it? Selling the company, stepping back from everything you built?" Alexander considered the question seriously, his hand still resting on hers. Around them, their home hummed with the quiet sounds of happiness. Liam's soft babbling, the tick of the clock on the mantel, the distant sound of neighbors' children playing outside. "You know what I regret?" he said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that this was what success actually looked like. Not the deals or the money or the recognition. This, coming home to you and Liam every day, being present for bedtime stories and middle-of-the-night feedings and first steps." He paused, looking around their living room with its family photos and scattered toys and the beautiful ordinariness of daily life. "I regret that I almost missed all of it, because I was too scared to believe I deserved it." Willow leaned over to kiss him, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted like forgiveness and promises and the kind of love that grows stronger through weathering storms together. "We almost lost each other," she whispered against his lips. "But we didn't," Alexander whispered back. "We fought for this. We chose this. Every day we choose this." Liam, apparently deciding that his parents weren't paying enough attention to him, knocked over his block tower with a delighted shriek that made them both laugh. "Yes," Alexander said, scooping up their son and pulling Willow close until they were all tangled together in the golden afternoon light. "Every single day we choose this." Outside, the seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring giving way to summer, summer fading into autumn, winter returning with its promise of renewal. But inside their home, time felt suspended in the perfect moment of a family that had found its way back to each other and was determined never to lose its way again. And as Liam settled sleepily between his parents, one small hand reaching for each of them, Willow understood that some miracles don't announce themselves with grand gestures. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of second chances, and the courage to build something beautiful from the pieces of what was broken. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding the perfect person. They're about two imperfect people choosing to fight for each other, to grow together, and to build something stronger than what broke them apart. When love is tested by real life, by fear and failure and the weight of actual responsibility, the choice to stay and work and hope becomes the most romantic act of all. What would you have done in Willow's place? When someone you love fails you completely but then proves they've truly changed, how do you find the courage to trust again? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.